Well, Jay, welcome on to the show, brother. It's good to have you.
Man, thanks for having me. It's been a long time coming. Glad we could work it out.
Yeah. So your book, you released it what? It's been like 2, 3 weeks.
Yeah, it's new. Yeah,
How's it
recent.
how's it been since it's come out? How's the process been? Because this is your third book. Are you used to
Yeah.
it yet, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think every book is like a child, so they're all very different. The first book felt very much like a first child, like, I don't know what I'm doing. This is crazy. Why do we do this? And it's
Yeah.
also the most beautiful thing ever. And the second book, I felt like, okay, I got a handle on it. But they were connected. They were kind of a part one, part two. This book is weird. I think some of it is just the season of life I'm in, the season of ministry I'm in. You and I were talking before we hit record, but our church has been in a teaching series that has required a lot of my attention, not just to preach, but a lot of pastoral meetings with people who've got questions and hurt and pain. And so that's actually been a strange gift. This is the book that I have. This is probably not a good thing to say for my publisher, but I have thought about this book the least
Mm,
upon release. I think about it a lot, and I love having conversations about it like this with people like you. But in terms of like, how's it doing? And is it like, I'm just
yeah.
trying to love my family and pastor my church. So
Yeah, and that's beautiful. It makes me want to get it actually even more. Um, do you think that that comes with the fact that it's your third one and you've learned from the first two, maybe that it doesn't, you don't need to stress about it that much. You don't need to be checking the numbers and blah. Because I imagine once you publish your first, even second book, it's like, oh, I want to be refreshing, and trying to see. Maybe you weren't that crazy, but I know for me, if I put something out and it's the first time and I'm not used to it, I'm wanting to make sure it's performing well or seeing, whatever it is.
yeah,
So,
no, that's it. Yeah, that's it. I learned a lot about myself in the last few years, just my own fragility and insecurity. And, God's continuing to do some work in me. So I'm really grateful. I feel the least amount of pressure with this book. I'm just as proud of it. The team put a lot of effort into it. My heart and soul are in it. But in terms of its performance or whatever, at the end of the day, I'm trying to be really faithful and play my part and have as many conversations with people as I can. But, I really try not to focus too much on the things I don't control, like how many copies it sells or whatever, and just do what I can. And ultimately, the goal of writing a book or hosting a podcast or anything like that is, I think, just to help people. So
mhm.
I hope that it helps, and if it can help a few people, then I'm happy.
Yeah, it's a great posture. So the title is "Listen, Listen, Speak," with the subtitle of "Hearing God and Being Heard in a Noisy World." What's that all about? Like, why that title?
Yeah, well, the title is interesting. I mean, people, I would have called it like 12 listens and then speak if I could. The
Okay,
publisher would not
like you
have
got
it.
to concise that a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. It's been, some people have told me, it's like, oh, I get it. It's like 2 ears, one mouth. And that's kind of true, I guess. But more than that, I found myself in recent years for a number of reasons, not the least of which is the fact that we live in a very noisy world. Just the noise in our own heads, as well as, social media, news media, the digital age, all that kind of stuff that I'm really interested in. I just found myself like unable to really hear the voices that matter most. First and foremost, it was becoming increasingly difficult to hear the voice of God with any sense of clarity. And two, I was finding myself in conversations with people not really listening, but instead sort of like hearing their words as background noise for when the opportune moment came up for me to be able to respond.
Mm,
So listen, speak. It's kind of a reminder to me when someone is speaking, I am trying to listen for the sake of listening, and
hmm.
then maybe I'll have something to say. And first and foremost, I want to listen for the voice of God that way, instead of just thinking about Him as this sort of like cosmic vending machine or Chat GPT, where I just plug in whatever question or request I have, and then boom, it spits out an answer. I want to like really listen for the voice of God and listen in a transformative way, in an active way, where I give him the gift of my attention, and then speak if there is something to say.
Mm.
Not assume that there is something meaningful to say, but speak when there is something meaningful to say, and to speak in a way that's gracious and kind and full of love and truth and all of that. So yeah, that's the premise of the book, and it's where the title comes from.
Yeah, okay. And so then, how do you think you in your own life have discovered what it means to actually listen to God or to hear God? You said that. Because for me, I'm still in the process of trying to learn what does it mean to hear God. And you're taught a whole bunch of different things growing up about, oh, hearing God means he's supposed to speak audibly, or actually the only way you can hear God is through the scriptures, or maybe just listen, be really still and quiet, and you'll hear a still small voice, and then you realize, oh wait, that's like just my thoughts, or what? And then you're wrestling. Oh, was it my thoughts? I don't really know. Was it like the devil? And there's all these different thoughts and questions that come into your head. So, in your own life, how have you found maybe the primary method that God speaks to you or just as people in general?
Yeah. I think we underestimate the power of establishing relational, conversational cadence and rhythm. So you can think about like the awkwardness of a first date or something. And I know there are people, I don't know how it was with you and your wife. I know that there are some people who go on a first date and they're like, oh my gosh, we hit it off from the moment we started speaking. It was just like, wow. That was not the case for me and my wife. Our first date 20 years ago, over 20 years ago, was really awkward, and those long lulls of silence. I felt like all this immense pressure to fill that dead air with with
Mm.
words. And obviously, it's not like that now. 20 plus years later, we can have long stretches of silence and still be in total communion with one another. And when we talk, it's light and easy and free. I feel no pressure to perform or to say the right thing or whatever. It's just we've established over time a really beautiful rhythm in such a way that we are communicating in a way that's deeper than words. And I think people who have those types of relationships can relate. Um, Dallas Willard, the late great Dallas Willard, has this like really profound line in one of his books called "Hearing God," which is like it was highly influential and impactful for me. Um, he says that our failure to hear God's voice when we want is due to the fact that we do not, in general, want to hear it. That we
Mm.
want it only when we think we need it. So, for me, I have discovered that that is one of the issues. My frustration with my own inability to hear God is actually born out of my lack of consistency in establishing a relational, conversational rhythm and cadence with God. In other words, God is always speaking. He's always communicating. It's just that I have failed so often to lean into the relationship on a consistent, daily basis, making it primary, a priority. And typically, what I found in my life is like I am desperately seeking the voice of God in those moments, like Willard says, in those moments, just when I think I need it. It's
Mm-hmm.
like hearing God is almost like a last resort when my own intellect and intuition and skill and ability and resources fall short. Then I'm like, oh my gosh, I need God here.
Yeah.
So, God, what do you think? What do you think? And it's not that he's not speaking in those moments. It's that I have been so sporadic in my relational connection with him that it's hard for me to recognize that voice. So, uh, getting practical, the most helpful thing for me in learning to hear the voice of God, listen for it and hear it, has been to listen for it and hear it all the time.
Mm.
to listen for it in all things, not just in those moments of desperation when I think I need it, but in all moments, in all of life. So that's still a process, obviously, that I'm embodying and trying to live out every day. But I have found it to be the most fruitful and effective way to attune my ears and my heart and my mind to the voice of God that's always speaking.
Yeah, that's good. But in a real practical, in a real practical way, in your life, do you experience times when you recognize God trying to communicate something to you? Do you recognize that just through maybe becoming more in tune with just like how you understand God speaking to you? What I mean is like you have a worldview that is understanding God as the ruler of the world and the being in charge of the cosmos, right? And so because of that, he's able to speak through his creation. And so maybe you are in your day to day life and you're looking at certain circumstances. You're looking at maybe some thing that you might call a divine intervention. You're saying, oh, that seems like it's God. Or to you, is it more you genuinely feel like there's something in your spirit that's trying to be communicated to you? Or do you find God using the people of God to share a message with you? Or is it all of them maybe? Like what's kind of the way that you encounter that most?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I would say it's all of that. It's all of that. Communication is an interesting thing. This the 20th century social commentator named Neil Postman, who he's not a Christian, he's just a secular social commentator. He famous for writing a book called "Amusing Ourselves to Death," and he's got this really beautiful thing he does, really profound, about how the mediums of communication sort of dictate um, how deep the communication goes. And he uses he uses the example of smoke signals, like
Mm.
in the ancient world, like Native Americans, for example, they would use smoke signals to communicate to one another. And he talks about how with a smoke signal, it's basically impossible to write a poem or a sonnet with smoke signals. You know what I mean? With smoke signals, you're essentially communicating like, we're over here,
Mm-hmm.
or we caught an animal for dinner. Like it's like such basic stuff based on, So when you think about that, we have letters and words, the alphabet and written word and whatever. Human beings as finite creatures, the sort of maximum capacity of our communication ability is primarily, not only, but it is primarily the spoken word or the written word. So right now we're having this conversation, you and I, and people are listening. And because you and I are making sounds with our mouths, we're like exhaling air from our lungs and we're putting our mouths and our tongues in particular positions to make sounds. That's literally what's happening right now. You
Mm-hmm.
and I are just making weird sounds. But humans and English speakers, we have given these sounds particular meanings. So now people are listening through whatever, their AirPods or in their car, or their computer speakers. On a literal level, they are just hearing strange sounds that you and I are making, but these sounds have been infused with meaning. And now these sounds we are making with our mouths are doing something in people's brains. Like that's literally what's happening right now. People are thinking about particular
Mm-hmm.
thoughts because we are making sounds with our mouths. That's how finite creatures communicate to one another. But God is infinite. God is not limited to words. He's not limited to sound. This is one of the reasons why people will ask all the time, is like, man, Jay, have you ever heard the audible voice of God? And initially, I know what the question means. Like my initial response is like, well, no, I've never heard the voice of God sounding like Morgan Freeman or something,
Yeah.
speaking
Yeah.
to me audibly. I've had a couple of moments where it felt very close, but I've never actually had that experience. But in a weird way, I have heard the almost audible sound or voice of God, in that God doesn't need to make sounds with his mouth to communicate. He's not bound by the limits of language because he's infinite. And, the Apostle Paul writes, like, you have the mind of Christ. You literally have the mind of Christ. You can think with
Yeah.
God. And so for me, it's all of those things you mentioned, as well as scripture and a number of other things
Yeah.
where I hear God speaking directly to me through my thoughts and my emotions, all against the backdrop of scripture. He'll never contradict what he has already spoken through the biblical writers in the scriptures. And when I put all those puzzle pieces together, man, it might as well be audible
Mm.
sometimes, and often it is also through his people, the community of God's people that I belong to. So yeah, my response to the question would be it's all of it, but not all of it is like sometimes it's this, sometimes it's that. It's all of it in this beautiful harmonious dance of God speaking
Mm.
and me listening. It's like, man, it's how he directs my thoughts and my emotions by his spirit, along with how God's people speak on his behalf to me, along with what the scriptures reveal to me about who he is, what he's about, his character, and on and on.
Yeah. One time I heard John Mark Comer, when he was talking about this same thing, it stuck to me to this day. He said, what is language? It's the ability to control one's thoughts.
Yeah.
He said, I don't know if you realize right now, but I am controlling your thoughts right now. And the only
Yeah.
way that, you can stop me from controlling your thoughts is if you just stick your fingers in your ears and you stop listening.
That's right.
And then his conclusion from that was, if I believe that the Holy Spirit dwells in us, it has direct access to my thoughts, which
Yeah.
essentially, I mean, most Christians I know do believe that God can, he does have direct access to your thoughts.
Yep.
That's why we don't think we have to pray out loud in order for God to hear us, right?
Yep.
And so
That's
if he
right.
has direct access to our thoughts, and language is the ability to control one's thoughts, then how does God communicate to you? And then you put that whole thing together. And I thought that was a really great way of making sense of it all.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to shift gears a little bit because I know you mentioned a lot in your book um, about social media and
Yeah.
kind of just like other things in regards to what distracts us in this world, things that maybe can take our mind away from trying to listen, and hopefully, eventually, maybe if we have something to speak. But yeah, can you talk to us a little bit about like what some of the things that you see as you were researching for this book? You're seeing, and even just as a pastor, like what's taking people's attention away from this process of communion with God?
Yeah. Not to talk about Postman too much, but he used to ask this question. He basically said that whenever a new technology sort of arrives on the cultural scene, people are enamored. We're just like, ChatGPT, AI. We're just like, oh my goodness, this is incredible. Look at what
Yeah.
it can do here. Look at what it can do there. And that's great. But Postman suggested we have to ask other questions. Namely, there's several, but two in particular that were so helpful to me. He said, we have to ask what is the specific problem that this new technology solves? And then what new problems do we create by solving this problem?
Mm-hmm.
When I think about social media, what's really interesting to me is that there is a bad answer to the first question, and there is a really sobering answer to the second question. So the first question: what is the problem this new technology solves? Well, just in its name, in what we call it, um, it implies that social media is designed to make us more social, to sort of buoy our social lives or our social connections. That that was the great promise of the internet, like 30 years ago.
Yeah.
When it like showed up on the scene, and then social media took it to the next level. A number of years ago, probably like 5 years ago or something, Mark Zuckerberg at a speech he gave in Chicago famously said, "Facebook will become the new church." He essentially
Wow.
said, like, you're not going to need social gatherings like a local church. You can just go to Facebook. So, like, even from its titan creators, the problem that social media, I guess, is intended to solve is the problem of social connection. But here we are in 2024, and this is not like a pastor sort of waxing poetic. Just look at the data, like secular psychological data.
Mm-hmm.
The work of people like Jonathan Haidt or
Yeah.
Jean Twenge. I mean, just look at the data. One, it has actually not solved, it has exacerbated and amplified the problem it promised to solve.
Yeah.
What all the data shows us is that social media actually destroys our social connectivity. So there's a terrible answer to the first question. What is the problem this new technology solves? And here's the thing, I am not anti-social media. I know it sounds like I am. I'm just trying to give us a sober assessment of what it's done. Because what I also believe is that tools, if we are intentional, we can leverage them for the good. So I actually think social media can be leveraged for good in the world. I see people leveraging it for good in the world. It's just that the overwhelming majority of
Mm-hmm.
people who use it leverage it unintentionally, not for good, but toward the destruction of our social connections. And again, the statistics bear that out. We feel less connected, we feel more isolated, more lonely, more
Mm-hmm.
depressed than ever, than any generation before us in recorded history. And then what are the new problems we create by solving this problem? And there is a very sobering answer to that. And again, the data bears it out. The new problems we create are the problems of disembodied experiences disguising themselves as meaningful connection. We have an entire generation of people who were born into a social media world who think that the depth of connection that is available to them is all mediated on screens. Like that's where everybody is, so that's where I've got to go. And that is a significant problem because embodied humans need embodied humans and we need embodied experiences. And embodied human beings, are also limited by finite time and space. Like I live in California, you live in Belgium. Like that's just reality. And I am
Mm-hmm.
grateful for technology. You and I are having this conversation right now because of digital technology. People listening are listening to this conversation right now because of digital technology and social media. That's a wonderful thing. But there is a much deeper connectivity that is available to us, but we're limited. It's got to happen in a real place at a real time. And so one of the significant problems it's creating is an inability to connect deeply. And if we cannot connect deeply, it will become almost impossible for us to truly hear one another, to really listen with empathy and compassion to one another's stories. And it becomes very challenging, especially in the sort of cacophonous noise that is social media. It becomes very challenging to speak in a way where you can actually be heard. So again, what I'm not suggesting is everybody throw away their phones and live on a farm and churn their own butter or something.
Yeah.
But I am suggesting that we need to take a very sober assessment of how these technologies are influencing and impacting us and shaping and forming us, and then respond responsibly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You mentioned Jonathan Haidt, which is funny because I was gonna ask you if you had read or encountered his newest work, The Anxious
Yeah,
Generation,
yeah,
because I haven't read it yet, but I listened to several podcasts that he went on talking about it, and it's exactly that. I mean, the statistics are staggering. When you look at the
yeah,
graphs of how as soon as 2012, I think was the date that
yep,
he talks about was when everybody starts having a social media account, everybody has a phone, everybody has unlimited data, and you just see the numbers and anxiety and depression just skyrocket, especially among the youth. And just he was talking on and on about how the same thing you're saying, it decreases our ability to be social, to have connectivity, to have community. And actually, one of the podcasts I listened to, he went on the Russell Moore show. Um, and although Jonathan Haidt, he's an atheist, he continued to go back to how what he found in his sociological research was that it seems like one of the big solutions was for people to be a part of a church or be a part of a religious
Yeah.
group, right? Because that was the place that they could go and connect with people on an intimate level, be with them, experience what it means to be human. You know what I'm saying? Like all these different things. And to
Yeah.
hear it coming from somebody like him, uh, yeah, and then he has all the numbers to back it up. So that was super helpful for me to really connect with that idea. I like also, I don't know if you know Cal Newport and his work,
Hmm.
but he uses the concept of digital minimalism. So
Yep.
that's what you're saying, where it's not like, okay, obviously we don't just need to get rid of everything, don't have a computer, don't have a phone, don't have any social media,
Right.
because, and some people do that, and I think that's great. But what he's saying is that's not required to live a life of flourishing. You don't need to do that. But in digital minimalism, the point is using it for its specific task that you like in order to get the thing out of it that you need to get out of it. So I
Yep.
use my phone or I use my computer to talk to you right now so I can get the podcast out to people and their lives can be benefited and they can learn how to follow Jesus better.
Yeah.
But I'm not on my phone getting caught doom scrolling on TikTok for 3 hours,
Yeah.
and
That's right.
and so yeah, I think you hit it right in the head. I've tried to implement this as much as possible in my own life,
Yeah.
and it's a work in progress.
Yeah. Yeah.
I literally have had to like revamp my entire phone settings,
Yeah.
put on a ton of different blockage, like ways to you can like block however many hours you get on a certain app and whatever. Put on different focus modes and stuff. I'm
Yeah.
curious, what for you have you found to help you regulate how much you are on all these different distracting things that are trying to grab your attention?
Yeah, it's all that. That's all the stuff that, brilliant, wonderful people who've, I'm sure, influenced both of us suggest. So, yeah, getting descriptive, not prescriptive,
Yeah,
digital fasts. So, Andy Crouch and TechWise Family talks about an hour a day a week a year. That's something that my family practices and we've come to really thoroughly enjoy. So it's more than an hour a day. It's more than a day a week. It's probably about a day a week, but it's more than a week a year. It's typically about 3 weeks every summer when I get away from
that's
with my
awesome.
family. I get away from all social media. I delete email and all of that from my phone and all that stuff. So those are helpful. The phone lives in our kitchen, not on my nightstand. It's not within reach. So the phone is not the last thing I look at before I go to bed. It's not the first thing I reach for when I get out of bed. I have an analog clock, like a literal
Hmm.
analog alarm clock that
I
I
like it.
set every night. And I cannot tell you, I mean, there's tons of research on this. One, there's just like literal physical, physiological benefits. You should not look at screens like an hour before you go to bed.
Yeah.
But beyond that, there's, all sorts of really like truly mental benefits, to just, reading a good book
Oh
or
yeah.
something before you go to bed, or just laying there with your thoughts. Like we've lost the art of being bored, but boredom
Uh-huh.
is the path to creativity, I think, in many ways. So some of my best thoughts come to mind when I'm just laying there at night before bed without a phone. So yeah, things like that that have been really helpful for me. I don't have I I've deleted so many apps on my phone. I try to keep it really simple and just the stuff I absolutely need. I have no pings on my phone, so
Okay.
if somebody texts me or somebody whatever likes an Instagram photo or something, I don't see any of that. Like I have to actually go to it and open it
Yeah.
to see it. So
Dude,
yeah,
I had this epiphany the other day where I realized that I can just delete apps whenever I want and then get them back. Like you know what I'm saying? Where I have Instagram. Instagram for me is something that if I'm not cautious, I'll spend so much time on it, whatever.
yeah,
And then I'm so serious. As of like 2 weeks ago, I just thought, huh, I can just literally delete this whenever I want, so that it becomes really challenging for me just to get on it in all the interim periods. So I
yeah,
have 5 minutes, when I'm going to the bathroom, and I normally would just pick up my phone and start scrolling, and I'm like, okay, but if I just delete it, I don't even have that option anymore. And
right,
it's not like it has to be deleted forever. Once a
yeah,
week I can download it back and I can catch up on everything that I was missing and then just
yep,
delete it again. And
exactly.
I've been practicing that for a little while, and it's been night and
There you
day
go.
different. And like you
Yeah,
said, I'm so much happier. I'm so much more present in the moment. I get all these genius ideas. Not really. I'm not that smart, but like, some of the
Yeah,
best ideas I have come to me in those
that's
moments.
right.
Like I said, it's an art that I think we've lost. The more I sit and think about it, the more I start to see how the people who I think will end up having the greatest impact on the world in the future are the people who will know how to not be mastered by the algorithms and by
Yep.
all, like, whoever learns how to sit and be with their thoughts and be present
Yep.
in the moment apart from the digital age. I think
Yep.
those are going to be the people who come up with the most innovative things, who become the greatest thinkers, the greatest leaders. Yeah, and it's going to really widen the gap. But
Yeah.
um,
I agree. Yeah, you mentioned Cal Newport earlier. He talks a lot about that. I listen to his podcast quite a bit. Yeah, he talks a ton about that. His latest book is actually about that in some ways, like the gift of your attention, laser focus, do less quantity, more quality, that sort of thing. And
mhm.
yeah, I could not agree with you more. I think the future belongs to those who are attentive, and
Yeah,
not distracted. So
that's good.
yeah.
So, well, that's step one, right? But then we wouldn't want to just leave it there as followers of Jesus. We would want to move on to replacing it with something beneficial. Namely, here in this
Yeah.
context, we're talking about hearing God, um, sitting with Him. And so for me, in step one of trying to, okay, reduce my time on my phone or whatever it is, but what I'm not being as successful at is replacing that with meaningful time with God.
Mm.
Um, so what's your advice to me? Pastor me here for a second. How can you help me to, or somebody who is like me, to, once you get that first step down, then actually help it be transferred into something really beneficial for my soul and my relationship with Jesus?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it, I think it's connected to what I said earlier in the conversation about establishing relational, conversational cadence and rhythm. And so, if there isn't a consistency in our relationship, um, we cannot expect the fact that God is our Father and we are His children to just, naturally, effortlessly mean we're going to have these wonderful, like, dynamic back and forths with Him. Um, I didn't know my dad, my father. My parents split up when I was really young, and I had literally zero relationship with my father. He lived in a different country. I never saw him. Had no Between the ages of 4 and 18. I think I could count on one hand how many phone conversations I had with him.
No.
That was the extent of it, and all those conversations were less than 5 minutes. So when I was 18, I actually moved to Korea, where he lived his entire life, to teach English there and take a gap year before college. And I remember, because he was out there, we got together for dinner a couple of times. And he's my father. I'm his son. And I might as well have been sitting there with a complete stranger. I mean, it was
Mm,
the most awkward. And the reason is, he's my father, I'm his son, but I didn't know him. I never spent time with him. We had no relational conversational rhythm or cadence. We had no trust equity. So it was so incredibly forced. And the reality is, for us, we have this expectation, well, he's God and he loves me. So anytime I go to him, it's just going to feel like so amazing. And that's just not true. Like, to get to that place where we hear God with not just clarity, but with dynamism, and hear his voice for what it truly is, we have to establish that sort of relational, conversational connection. So what that means is practice. It means every single day, knowing that it will be awkward and boring most of the time, especially early on, still continuing to show up.
mhm.
Still showing up every single day saying, Lord, here I am. Speak, Lord, your servant is listening. So again, there are lots of practical things. For me, it's, again, descriptive, not prescriptive. Every morning while I make my coffee, I immerse myself in a psalm. I'll just read and meditate and pray a psalm over and over. I do that every morning. I spend time reading through the Gospels every day. literally just in rotation. I'm just immersing myself in the story of Jesus. Um, I pray the Lord's Prayer every morning. I pray it specifically for my wife and children and for our friends and for our church. I literally just go through each of the movements of the Lord's Prayer because he taught us to pray. When you pray, pray this way.
Mm-hmm.
I practice breath prayers throughout the day, so they're always seasonal. I have a sort of seasonal breath prayer that I will pray, especially in moments when I feel overworked or anxious or whatever it might be. And then every evening before bed, Jenny and I sit down with our kids and we practice the Ignatian prayer practice of the Examined. So we
Mm-hmm.
examine our day with God together. And most of the time for my kids, it's like boring and they don't want to and they just like rush through it. But they do it every night. And I think that's the key, you know, and I'm watching them grow into this rhythm with God where it's becoming more and more real to them. So again, descriptive, not prescriptive, but I really do think it's about practice, you know, Brother Lawrence practicing the presence of God. And Brother Lawrence has this incredible line in that book where he talks about the more you know him, like the more you seek to know him, the more you will want to know him,
Mm-hmm.
which has been true in my experience. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess in my experience, the hardest period for me is that first few, however long, maybe it's a week, maybe it's 2 weeks, maybe it's even longer, where I have to keep coming back to the place as a discipline in order to be faithful. But it's like I feel like I'm getting nothing. Sometimes, and I'll come to that place of trying to silence my thoughts and be with God and listen to His voice, and it'll be like an hour and a half, and I'll come out of that thinking, What just happened? Did anything just happen? And what I hear you saying is for those people who that is their experience, that is their reality, and maybe they can never get over that hump of continuing to come back to that place as a practice. What I hear you saying is be encouraged. God will show up.
yeah, yeah. And it's not just that he'll show up, he's already there. What you're
Mm,
doing is you are reorienting your body, your heart, your mind um, toward him. And that takes time. It takes time. But once you get there, there's yeah, I mean it's a profound shift in our relationship with God if we can commit to doing the work.
yeah, I think you had this line in the book. You said God isn't interested in giving us answers; He's
Mm.
interested in giving us Himself.
Yeah,
Man,
that's right.
wow.
Mm.
Wow. That's really, really good. Um, so you've talked about a few people so far that have really impacted your life, your understanding of Christian spirituality, what it means to be with God. Is there anybody else that you can say like they had a really strong impact on me as a Christian, as a thinker, as a pastor, even as like a spiritual Christian spiritual author, things like that?
Yeah.
Who do you credit a lot of your learning towards? Who we haven't already mentioned, I guess.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, there's plenty of people that no one listening would know. Just people in my own life. I think that's
Yeah.
true for most of us. You know, my mother, still to this day, one of the most passionate followers of Jesus I know. You know, people listening hear me talking about developing this relational, conversational rhythm with God by immersing yourself in His presence every single day. That is my mom. I learned that from my mom. For as long as I can remember, from early childhood, I watched my mom every morning immerse herself in the scriptures and end every day immersing herself in the scriptures and in deep, deep abiding prayer. I'm not talking like, "Oh Lord, thank you for this day. Give me another good day tomorrow and going to bed." I mean, like sitting at the kitchen table and just, you know, for an hour or two after a long, hard day, spending time with the Lord. So I watched her do this. So she's one, and then of course incredible friends and pastors in my own life who've been so impactful and influential. Yeah, in terms of writers, I've already mentioned, Dallas Willard and people like Eugene Peterson. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I could go on and on. There are so many. It depends on kind of like which category, we're talking about. The works of Dietrich Bonhoeffer have been incredibly helpful and insightful for me. And then more contemporary folks, friends who've written books that have been so helpful. But
It
yeah,
would be impossible to name them all.
there's a long list for sure. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, awesome. Well, the book is Listen, Listen, Speak, available on Amazon right now, guys. You should go get it. Jay, thanks so much for your time. Thanks so much
Oh
for
man.
speaking with me and sharing with us all your wisdom.
Oh, dude, of course. Thank you for having me on, Ethan. It was a joy.